Hello there and a good evening to you. Just a reminder that we're going to be talking to Kevin Schofield in a bit about that pact or not to pact between Reform and the Tories. I think they're protesting far too much. Anyway, it is the International Day of People with Disabilities. This, as I said, was brought about to bring awareness to people struggling with disabilities, promoted by the UN since 1992. According to research by the Department for Work and Pensions, nearly 17 million people have a disability in the UK. That is a quarter of the total population. And in the last 10 years, the number of people with disabilities has increased by nearly 5 million. As more people face living with a disability, have things got better for them? We like to think that it would, wouldn't there, as there is more awareness, perhaps. Let's talk now to Dr. Amo Raju OBE, a disability and charity expert. Dr. Amo, it's good to see you again.
Good evening.
Good evening, good to see you. We all like to think that the plight of somebody who's disabled must have improved over the years, but has it really? And is that down to a lack of awareness?
Well, Petrie, the way I normally look at this is, I've been a disabled person all my life with a physical impairment, and I entered the disability workplace. I started working for a charity in the Midlands called Disability Direct as an advisor 30 years ago, and over that 30 years, I can only say things have gone worse. You know, when I first started, on the first day, my boss at that time said, "We've got real problems with social care. Welfare rights is still not enough to the income coming in for disabled households is still not enough to make ends meet." And here we are today, 30 years later. The gap in finance between disabled people and non-disabled people is over £1,000 a month. Social care is in a complete mess. Trying to get a job as a disabled person is a nightmare, and then once you get a job, sustaining employment is just as difficult. So I don't think things have got any better at all. And on top of that, more than ever, societal attitude towards disabled people has got quite frightening. You know, I hear the number of hate crimes against disabled people is higher than ever before. You know, we're in a world where disabled people aren't comfortable talking about their impairments anymore, particularly on social media, because they get attacked. I put a post up yesterday about Motability, as it was mentioned in the budget last week.
Yeah, it was.
And the amount of people that have you know, in so many words, describe disabled people as scroungers for wanting to access that basic right of getting from A to B. You know, we're in a very scary world for disabled people in the UK, which I thought was going to be a bit more of a progressive country when it comes to rights for disabled people.
Yeah, there seems to be a sort of febrile hatred almost everywhere for everything at the moment, and of course that is going to bleed through, and also the attitudes of I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. I am actually reporting this from a point of view of seeing it, is kids taking the mick out of somebody in a wheelchair, and a lot of adults walking by. I didn't walk by, but I got a mouthful myself. I don't care, I can handle that. But it is extremely difficult, isn't it? There seems to be just empathy is not a thing anymore. There doesn't seem to be that compassion in society. No,
and I think, you know, I don't want to get political about this, but a lot of the time, this comes from those policymakers, those decision makers who, when it comes to making cuts, because yes, okay, we all understand the country's finances are in a mess, but time after time, since, you know, all governments in the past have always targeted disabled people when it comes to cutting budgets for general spending, economical spending. And so we're always seen as a burden on society. And that makes, you know, communities around us start looking at us in a different way. Instead of being empathetic, they look at us as a burden on the state. I remember reading a document a while ago, and I do a lot of disability equality training, and one of the things I always mention is there used to be the eugenics society in this country, and they describe disabled people as a burden on the state, and that's only 80 to 100 years ago. We seem to be entering that conversation again, and that's quite worrying for me. And I think there's a whole generation of disabled people who are coming through the system, having this really unnecessary experience. The government wants to get disabled people into employment, but we haven't got society's attitude right yet in terms of considering us as equals. To say, well, okay, if to consider disabled people as equals, we've got to start treating them as everyday members of society, not targets. And we've got to get out of that mindset. And once we've done that, the next generation stands a chance.
But how do we do that? I mean, it is. I always thought, I think that empathy is quite easy to teach, actually. My son is a very empathetic boy and man, and he will always stop and help somebody with he would always do that. He's 28 years old, but he's just that, because he's seen me do that, I think. But so why? There's a lot of jealousy as well with disability, because people think, well, they've got a flash car. I'd rather have use of my legs, or I'd rather have use of all my faculties. And not be in pain, right? But there's a lot of people who look at it from that point of view, and they think, oh, they've got something that I haven't got, which is pathetic.
It is, and jealousy is quite an interesting way of looking at it, because one of the things I always say is, we've got to get to, I went, as a child, I went through a mainstream school, and none of my fellow classmates ever saw me as the disabled child. I was the only disabled child in the school. And, we need more of that, more integrated conversation. We need non-disabled children learning about disability. We need it as a subject you just mentioned in your statistics that 25% of the population is noted as having some kind of impairment, as a disabled with a disability. You can't ignore 25% of the population. Then you've got to include it in the curriculum. Those conversations need to be had about in the classroom now. If 25% of the children are disabled, we need to understand what their life is, what they're going through, and then we'll create a more empathetic society.
We also have a problem though with visibility, and it's almost like the chicken and the egg situation is that a lot of disabled people don't feel welcome in society. So they're not seen in society. So society can't get used to seeing people with disabilities and realising they're just people. And then the circle goes round again. So that is the problem, isn't it? That I was just saying that, I have MS. I don't know what's going to happen to me in the future, but I do look at the world differently and think about it in terms of what if I do end up in a wheelchair, and the world isn't accessible. It just doesn't seem welcoming to people of other abilities.
And forgive me if your viewers have heard me quote this before, but I say this time and time again because I feel so strongly about it. No matter what you're doing in life today, if you are fit and healthy and you are, thinking, doesn't affect that subject, doesn't affect me. At some stage in life, disability is going to get you. You can't escape from it, whether it's through old age, whether it's through a road traffic accident, or whether it's through God knows, or whether it could be a loved one that's close to you, a husband, a wife, son, daughter, a parent. You become directly affected, and it's too late to start thinking about it then. You need to start having that conversation in your household, in your streets, in your neighborhoods, with your local politicians now, say, what are we doing about society? For everyone, we're all going to be affected by this at some stage. What are we doing about it? It's the same thing about social care. You know, we've got a social care crisis, and no one's talking about it until they need social care.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to start talking about this subject now, not when it affects us. It's got to talk. The people who aren't affected by it need to start talking about it now.
But we've all become incredibly selfish, haven't we? We've all become, it's all about me, me, me. And we've all become, in a sense, cut off from much of society. People are on their phones the whole time. They live in fantasy worlds of, you know, these social media things. So they don't really engage, I think, in the world. And it's easy to see that in London. You know, people famously don't talk to each other, famously don't really help each other. Well, I've always found that if you ask for help, somebody will help you in London. They're pretty cool. But no, nobody's going to just offer. But are people just too shut down, maybe, as well, to even bother thinking about what anybody else might be going through?
I think, yeah, you know, particularly in this country today, everyone's going through some kind of crisis, you know, financial or whatever. Everyone is worried about something or the other. So we do, when we're not happy with whatever's going on in our life, we stop to think about our neighbours.
Yeah, true.
Stop to think about everybody else. You know, it's how do I get myself out of this particular issue I'm going through? So we do become less sympathetic and empathetic, and we just become very insular. And until we fixed, you know, the people's income levels and feeling safe and secure, we're not going to get to people start thinking about their neighbours and even their own family members. I've seen, you know, disabled people neglected by their own family members because they've got too much going on. So, you know, there's a lot to fix before we get to that. But you know,
it starts with us, though, right? It starts with us, each individually, just not being a horrible person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, lovely to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Amo Raju OBE, DL, disability and charity expert. So that's the phone in at midnight. Do give me a call, 0344 499 1000.